Every person who has ever dated an avoidant partner has experienced a time when the avoidant partner increasingly starts to become more and more disrespectful. To the untrained eye, this feels hurtful and confusing. But once you learn how the avoidant operates, you will see their disrespect for what it actually is, a test of what their partner will tolerate. Avoidant individuals systematically engage in disrespectful behaviors that function as sophisticated psychological testing mechanisms designed to assess their partner's boundaries, self-worth, and relationship commitment, while simultaneously protecting themselves from emotional vulnerability. This disrespect operates through multiple interconnected strategies that serve crucial functions in their attachment system, from gauging partner attachment security to creating emotional distance when intimacy becomes threatening. The psychological architecture of avoidant testing. Avoidant disrespect functions as a sophisticated psychological testing system designed to evaluate multiple aspects of their partner's emotional stability, boundary enforcement, and relationship worthiness. This testing architecture operates through carefully calibrated behaviors that assess their partner's responses while providing the avoidant with crucial information about relationship safety and partner attachment security. Their testing begins with boundary assessment behaviors designed to determine whether their partner maintains appropriate self-respect and personal standards. They engage in subtle boundary violations, disrespectful comments, or dismissive behaviors while monitoring their partner's responses to gauge whether they will enforce appropriate limits or tolerate inappropriate treatment. The avoidant testing mechanisms include emotional stability evaluation, where they create deliberately provocative situations to assess their partner's emotional regulation capacity and response patterns. They observe whether their partner reacts with emotional dysregulation, desperate pursuit, or calm boundary enforcement, using this information to determine relationship safety and their own emotional investment levels. Their psychological architecture extends to commitment testing, where they gauge their partner's relationship dedication through disrespectful treatment that reveals whether their partner will maintain relationship investment despite poor treatment. This testing helps them determine whether their partner represents secure attachment or anxious attachment that might become clingy or demanding. The avoidant testing system also involves authenticity evaluation, where they determine whether their partner's caring behavior stems from genuine affection or from neediness and emotional dependency. They use disrespectful behavior to distinguish between partners who care for them authentically versus those who need their validation or approval to maintain self-worth. Their testing architecture includes power dynamic assessment, where they determine relationship control distribution and their partner's willingness to maintain equal partnership versus submissive positioning. This power evaluation influences their comfort level with emotional investment and vulnerability within the relationship structure. The boundary testing mechanisms. Avoidants engage in systematic boundary testing that serves multiple functions in their attachment strategy, from assessing partner self-worth to creating emotional distance when relationships become too intimate. These boundary violations operate as deliberate provocations designed to elicit responses that provide crucial information about relationship dynamics and partner emotional health. Their boundary testing begins with minor disrespect incidents designed to gauge their partner's response patterns without creating major relationship conflicts. They might make dismissive comments, ignore reasonable requests, or engage in subtly disrespectful behaviors while carefully monitoring their partner's reaction to determine their boundary enforcement capacity. The avoidant testing mechanisms include escalating boundary violations that gradually increase in severity based on their partner's responses to initial testing. If their partner tolerates minor disrespect without appropriate pushback, they escalate to more significant boundary violations to continue their assessment of partner self-worth and relationship standards. Their boundary testing extends to respect withholding in areas where their partner has explicitly communicated expectations or needs. They deliberately violate stated boundaries to determine whether their partner will enforce consequences or simply express frustration without implementing appropriate responses to boundary violations. The avoidant testing system also involves public versus private disrespect assessment, where they gauge whether their partner maintains consistent boundary enforcement across different social contexts. They test whether their partner will address disrespectful behavior in public settings or only when they are alone together. Their boundary mechanisms include testing their partner's willingness to end the relationship over disrespectful treatment, using this information to calibrate their behavior within acceptable limits that maintain relationship participation while avoiding consequences that might threaten their access to connection and validation. The emotional stability assessment process. Avoidants use disrespectful behavior as a systematic method for evaluating their partner's emotional stability and regulation capacity, seeking evidence of secure attachment versus anxious attachment patterns that might indicate future relationship complications or emotional demands beyond their comfort level. Their stability assessment begins with emotional provocation designed to trigger their partner's stress responses while observing their emotional regulation capacity and recovery time. They monitor whether their partner responds with calm boundary enforcement, emotional dysregulation, or pursuit behaviors that indicate anxious attachment activation. The avoidant assessment process includes consistency evaluation, where they determine whether their partner maintains stable emotional responses across different situations or demonstrates emotional volatility that might indicate underlying psychological instability or attachment insecurity that could create future relationship demands. Their emotional testing extends to stress response monitoring, where they observe their partner's coping mechanisms during deliberately created relationship stress. They assess whether their partner maintains personal stability, seeks appropriate support, or becomes emotionally dependent on the avoidant for regulation and reassurance. The avoidant stability evaluation also involves independence assessment, where they gauge their partner's capacity for autonomous emotional functioning versus dependency patterns that might indicate clingy or demanding attachment styles that threaten avoidant autonomy and emotional safety. Their assessment process includes recovery evaluation, where they monitor how quickly and effectively their partner returns to baseline emotional functioning after disrespectful incidents, using this information to determine whether their partner represents emotionally stable partnership or potential emotional burden. The commitment and investment testing framework. Avoidants engage in disrespectful testing, specifically designed to evaluate their partner's commitment level and relationship investment without requiring equivalent emotional investment from themselves. This testing framework allows them to assess relationship security while maintaining their own emotional distance and autonomy protection. Their commitment testing begins with withdrawal and dismissiveness, designed to gauge whether their partner pursues them despite poor treatment or maintains appropriate self-respect and emotional boundaries. They monitor their partner's response to determine whether they represent secure attachment or anxious attachment that might become overwhelming. The avoidant investment testing includes deliberate relationship devaluation, where they express doubts about compatibility, minimize relationship importance, or suggest alternative relationship structures while monitoring their partner's responses to these commitment challenges and relationship uncertainty creation. Their testing framework extends to priority assessment, where they deliberately schedule competing activities, ignore important dates, or demonstrate casual attitudes toward relationship obligations to gauge their partner's responses to feeling unimportant or undervalued in the relationship hierarchy. The avoidant commitment evaluation also involves jealousy and competition introduction, where they reference other potential partners, maintain connections with ex-partners, or create situations that trigger their partner's insecurity to assess their emotional responses and relationship security levels. Their testing framework includes sacrifice evaluation, where they assess their partner's willingness to accommodate their preferences, adjust their own needs, or make relationship compromises without equivalent reciprocal accommodation from the avoidant partner. The authenticity versus neediness evaluation. Avoidants use disrespectful behavior to distinguish between partners who offer genuine care and affection versus those whose caring stems from emotional neediness, validation seeking, or psychological dependency that might eventually become burdensome or threatening to avoidant autonomy. Their authenticity evaluation begins with withdrawal testing, where they become less available, responsive, or affectionate while monitoring whether their partner's caring behavior continues or decreases based on the reduced positive reinforcement they receive from the avoidant. The avoidant neediness assessment includes attention withholding, designed to determine whether their partner's affectionate behavior stems from genuine appreciation or from addiction to avoidant validation and approval that indicates underlying self-worth deficits and emotional dependency patterns. Their evaluation process extends to independence testing, where they assess whether their partner maintains personal interests, friendships, and life satisfaction independent of the relationship or demonstrates concerning dependency patterns that might indicate future emotional demands. The avoidant authenticity testing also involves conflict response evaluation, where they gauge whether their partner addresses disrespectful behavior from a position of self-respect and appropriate boundaries versus desperate attempts to regain avoidant approval and validation. Their neediness evaluation includes emotional regulation assessment, where they determine whether their partner can maintain stable emotional functioning during periods of avoidant unavailability or demonstrates anxiety and dysregulation that indicates problematic attachment dependency. The power dynamic and control assessment. Avoidants engage in disrespectful testing, specifically designed to establish and evaluate power dynamics within relationships, seeking partners who maintain appropriate self-respect and equality rather than submissive positioning that might indicate future relationship problems or emotional burden. Their power assessment begins with dominance testing, where they attempt to establish superior positioning through dismissive behavior, decision-making control, or emotional unavailability while monitoring their partner's responses to determine whether they will maintain equal partnership or accept subordinate roles. The avoidant control evaluation includes decision-making testing, where they make unilateral choices affecting the relationship, ignore their partner's preferences, or demonstrate casual attitudes toward their partner's needs and opinions while assessing their partner's responses to these power imbalances. Their power testing extends to respect reciprocity assessment, where they gauge whether their partner maintains consistent self-respect and expects equivalent treatment or demonstrates willingness to accept lesser treatment in exchange for relationship participation and avoidant attention. The avoidant dynamic evaluation also involves leadership and initiative testing, where they assess their partner's capacity for independent decision-making, personal strength, and leadership abilities versus dependency patterns that might indicate future emotional burden or relationship imbalance. Their control assessment includes boundary enforcement evaluation, where they determine whether their partner consistently enforces appropriate limits on disrespectful behavior or demonstrates flexibility in their standards that might indicate underlying self-worth deficits. Strategic response framework for passing the tests. Understanding avoidant disrespect as testing behavior rather than genuine contempt provides opportunities for strategic responses that demonstrate the emotional stability, self-respect, and secure attachment patterns that avoidants unconsciously seek in long-term partners. The strategic response framework begins with calm boundary enforcement that addresses disrespectful behavior without emotional dysregulation, desperate pursuit, or aggressive retaliation that indicates anxious attachment activation or emotional instability that avoidants find threatening. Effective responses include consistent consequence implementation, where disrespectful behavior results in appropriate relationship consequences, such as reduced availability, activity cancellation, or emotional distance that demonstrates self-respect without emotional pursuit or punishment-seeking behaviors. The strategic framework extends to emotional regulation demonstration, where responses to testing behaviors showcase stable emotional functioning, independent coping capacity, and secure attachment patterns that indicate partnership potential rather than emotional burden or dependency risks. Strategic responses also involve independence maintenance, where partners continue pursuing personal interests, maintaining friendships, and demonstrating life satisfaction independent of avoidant validation or relationship participation, indicating authenticity rather than neediness in their caring behaviors. The response framework includes direct communication about boundaries and expectations without emotional escalation, manipulation attempts, or desperate appeals that might indicate anxious attachment patterns that threaten avoidant autonomy and emotional safety. The consequence implementation system. Successful response to avoidant testing requires systematic consequence implementation that demonstrates self-respect and appropriate boundaries without emotional pursuit or punishment behaviors that indicate anxious attachment or emotional dysregulation. The consequence system begins with immediate boundary enforcement, where disrespectful behavior results in predictable, proportionate responses that protect personal dignity while avoiding emotional escalation or relationship threats that might activate avoidant defensive responses. Effective consequences include availability reduction, where disrespectful treatment results in decreased emotional and physical accessibility without pursuit behaviors or attempts to manipulate avoidant behavior through withdrawal or punishment strategies. The implementation system extends to activity modification, where planned shared experiences are canceled or modified in response to disrespectful behavior, demonstrating that inappropriate treatment affects relationship privileges without creating relationship insecurity or abandonment threats. Consequence implementation also involves emotional investment adjustment, where disrespectful behavior results in appropriate emotional distance that protects personal well-being while maintaining relationship participation at levels that match the avoidant's demonstrated investment and respect levels. The system includes communication boundary establishment, where disrespectful conversation patterns result in topic changes, conversation endings, or reduced communication frequency that protects emotional well-being without creating relationship ultimatums or emotional pursuit. The emotional regulation display strategy. Demonstrating emotional regulation during avoidant testing provides crucial evidence of secure attachment patterns and emotional stability that avoidants seek in long-term relationship partners. The regulation display begins with calm response maintenance during deliberately provocative situations that showcases emotional maturity and stability rather than reactivity patterns that might indicate anxious attachment or emotional dependency that threatens avoidant autonomy. Effective emotional regulation includes stress response management, where testing behaviors are addressed through measured, thoughtful responses that demonstrate emotional processing capacity rather than impulsive reactions that might indicate emotional instability or attachment insecurity. The display strategy extends to recovery demonstration, where quick return to baseline emotional functioning after disrespectful incidents shows emotional resilience and independent regulation capacity that indicates partnership potential rather than emotional burden. Emotional regulation display also involves communication clarity during conflict, where concerns are expressed through direct, non-emotional language that addresses behaviors without attacking character or creating emotional escalation that might trigger avoidant defensive responses. The strategy includes emotional independence demonstration, where personal emotional stability is maintained regardless of avoidant behavior patterns, indicating secure attachment and authentic caring rather than validation seeking or approval dependent relationship participation. The independence and authenticity demonstration. Proving authentic care rather than needy dependency requires demonstrating genuine interest in the avoidant as a person while maintaining independent life satisfaction and emotional stability. Independence demonstration begins with maintaining personal interests, friendships, and goals that provide life satisfaction independent of the relationship, indicating authentic partnership desire rather than emotional dependency or validation seeking through relationship participation. Authentic caring display includes consistent supportive behavior that continues regardless of avoidant responsiveness or reciprocal treatment, demonstrating genuine affection rather than transactional caring based on receiving equivalent emotional investment or validation. The demonstration extends to emotional stability maintenance during periods of avoidant withdrawal or unavailability, showing secure attachment patterns and independent emotional regulation rather than anxiety or pursuit behaviors that indicate attachment dependency. Authenticity demonstration also involves honest communication about needs and boundaries without manipulation attempts, emotional escalation, or desperate appeals that might indicate underlying neediness or validation seeking rather than genuine relationship investment. The independence display includes decision-making autonomy, where personal choices are made based on individual values and preferences rather than attempts to gain avoidant approval or avoid avoidant disapproval that might indicate concerning dependency patterns. The long-term testing evolution and relationship trajectory. Understanding how avoidant testing evolves over time provides insight into relationship progression and the ongoing evaluation process that determines their emotional investment and commitment levels. The testing evolution begins with initial boundary and stability assessment that gradually decreases in frequency and intensity as partners demonstrate consistent, appropriate responses that indicate secure attachment and emotional stability rather than anxious attachment patterns. Long-term testing includes periodic reevaluation, where avoidants engage in occasional disrespectful testing to confirm that their partner maintains appropriate self-respect and emotional stability, particularly during relationship stress periods or intimacy increases that trigger attachment fears. The trajectory involves graduated emotional investment, where consistent, appropriate responses to testing behaviors result in increased avoidant emotional availability, vulnerability, and relationship investment as they develop confidence in partner stability and relationship safety. Testing evolution also includes intimacy threshold adjustments, where successful navigation of testing behaviors allows for deeper emotional connection and vulnerability sharing as avoidants develop trust in their partner's emotional regulation and boundary maintenance capacity. The long-term trajectory involves either relationship deepening through successful test navigation or relationship termination when partners fail to demonstrate the emotional stability and self-respect that avoidants require for sustained emotional investment and vulnerability. The failed test consequences and relationship deterioration. When partners fail to respond appropriately to avoidant testing behaviors, the consequences extend far beyond individual incidents to create systematic relationship deterioration that confirms the avoidant's unconscious beliefs about relationship safety and partner worthiness. Understanding these failure consequences reveals why appropriate responses are crucial for relationship survival and avoidant emotional investment. Failed testing creates escalating disrespect patterns, where inappropriate responses to initial boundary violations result in increasingly severe testing behaviors as the avoidant continues searching for evidence of partner self-respect and emotional stability. This escalation continues until either appropriate boundaries are established or the relationship becomes unsustainable. The consequences of failed testing include avoidant emotional withdrawal, where partners who demonstrate anxious pursuit, emotional dysregulation, or boundary flexibility trigger increased avoidant defensive strategies that create greater emotional distance and relationship dissatisfaction for both partners. Failed test responses also result in avoidant respect loss, where partners who tolerate inappropriate treatment without appropriate consequences are categorized as weak or needy, resulting in decreased attraction, reduced emotional investment, and eventual relationship devaluation that leads to termination or chronic dissatisfaction. The deterioration process includes relationship categorization, where failed testing moves partners from potential long-term relationship consideration to casual or temporary relationship status, limiting the avoidant's willingness to invest emotionally or commit to future planning and relationship progression. Failed testing consequences extend to attraction destruction, where partners who demonstrate dependency, emotional instability, or poor boundary enforcement lose their appeal as romantic partners, becoming sources of obligation or burden rather than sources of satisfaction and connection. The successful test navigation and relationship rewards. Partners who successfully navigate avoidant testing through appropriate boundary enforcement and emotional regulation demonstrate the secure attachment patterns that avoidants unconsciously seek, resulting in increased respect, attraction, and emotional investment that transforms relationship dynamics toward greater intimacy and commitment potential. Successful test navigation creates respect development, where appropriate responses to disrespectful behavior demonstrate personal strength and emotional stability that increases avoidant attraction and willingness to invest emotionally in the relationship rather than maintaining defensive distance and emotional unavailability. The rewards of successful testing include increased avoidant vulnerability, where partners who demonstrate emotional regulation and appropriate boundaries create psychological safety that allows avoidants to risk greater emotional expression and intimacy sharing without triggering their defensive protection systems. Successful navigation also results in relationship prioritization, where partners who pass testing criteria are moved from casual relationship status to serious relationship consideration, resulting in increased emotional investment, future planning discussions, and commitment progression that reflects genuine avoidant attachment development. The rewards extend to attraction maintenance, where partners who demonstrate independence, emotional stability, and appropriate self-respect continue generating romantic and sexual attraction rather than becoming sources of obligation or emotional burden that characterize failed relationships with avoidant individuals. Successful testing navigation creates positive relationship cycles where appropriate boundaries and emotional stability generate increased avoidant investment, which creates better treatment, which reinforces secure attachment patterns, creating upward relationship spirals rather than downward deterioration patterns. The testing frequency and intensity patterns. Avoidant testing behaviors follow predictable frequency and intensity patterns that correspond to relationship stages, intimacy levels, and their internal anxiety about emotional vulnerability and commitment expectations that threaten their psychological safety and autonomy protection. Testing frequency increases during relationship transition periods, where movement toward greater intimacy, commitment discussions, or future planning triggers avoidant anxiety that requires partner stability, assessment through increased disrespectful behavior, designed to gauge boundary enforcement and emotional regulation capacity. The intensity patterns include escalation during vulnerability moments, where avoidant emotional expression or intimate sharing is followed by testing behaviors designed to assess whether partners will use their vulnerability against them or maintain appropriate respect and emotional safety. Testing frequency also corresponds to external stress periods, where work pressures, family conflicts, or social challenges create additional emotional burden that makes relationship maintenance feel threatening, resulting in increased testing to determine whether partners represent additional stress or emotional support and stability. The patterns include seasonal testing, where predictable life events like holidays, anniversaries, or milestone dates trigger avoidant anxiety about relationship expectations and obligations, resulting in increased disrespectful behavior designed to assess partner responses to emotional withdrawal and relationship devaluation. Testing intensity varies based on partner responses, where appropriate boundary enforcement results in decreased testing frequency, while inadequate responses result in escalating testing until appropriate limits are established or the relationship becomes unsustainable for either partner. The gender differences in avoidant testing strategies. Male and female avoidants employ different testing strategies that reflect socialized gender patterns and cultural expectations while serving identical functions of assessing partner worthiness and creating emotional distance when relationships become too intimate or threatening to their psychological safety. Male avoidant testing often involves emotional withdrawal, communication reduction, and attention withholding that creates emotional distance while assessing partner responses to decreased availability and investment. They may become less responsive, cancel plans, or demonstrate casual attitudes toward relationship obligations. Female avoidant testing frequently includes criticism, emotional volatility, and conflict creation that tests partner emotional regulation and boundary maintenance while creating relationship turbulence that provides justification for emotional distance and commitment avoidance. Male avoidants commonly use competition introduction and option maintenance as testing strategies, where references to other women, maintain connections with ex-partners, or flirtation behaviors test partner security and boundary enforcement while preserving their sense of freedom and attractiveness. Female avoidants often employ independence demonstration and self-sufficiency, emphasis as testing methods, where they refuse help, reject emotional support, or demonstrate capability without partnership to test whether partners will respect their autonomy or become controlling and possessive. Both genders use respect withholding as primary testing mechanisms, but express this differently based on socialized communication patterns and cultural expectations about appropriate masculine and feminine behavior in relationships. The cultural and social context of avoidant testing. Avoidant testing behaviors are significantly influenced by cultural expectations, social environments, and generational patterns that shape how disrespect is expressed and interpreted within relationship contexts, affecting both testing strategies and appropriate response patterns. Cultural contexts that emphasize individual achievement and independence often normalize avoidant testing behaviors as reasonable relationship standards rather than attachment-based defensive strategies, making appropriate boundary enforcement more challenging for partners who may interpret testing as normal relationship dynamics. Social environments that promote casual relationship norms and commitment avoidance provide external validation for avoidant testing behaviors, while making partners who enforce appropriate boundaries appear demanding or unrealistic in their relationship expectations and standards. Generational differences in communication patterns and relationship expectations affect how avoidant testing is expressed and interpreted, with younger generations potentially using technology-mediated disrespect, while older generations employ more traditional forms of emotional withdrawal and availability manipulation. Professional environments that reward emotional detachment and competitive behaviors may reinforce avoidant testing strategies while providing rational justification for disrespectful treatment that makes partner boundary enforcement appear to conflict with career success and professional development. Cultural gender expectations influence both testing expression and response patterns, with some cultures normalizing male emotional unavailability or female emotional volatility in ways that complicate appropriate boundary enforcement and consequence implementation. The recovery and relationship repair process. When avoidant testing has created significant relationship damage through failed responses or excessive testing frequency, recovery requires systematic repair processes that address both the underlying attachment fears and the behavioral patterns that have developed between partners. Recovery begins with avoidant recognition of their testing patterns and acceptance of responsibility for the disrespectful behaviors that have damaged relationship, trust, and partner emotional well-being, regardless of their unconscious motivations or attachment-based justifications for these behaviors. The repair process includes consistent behavior change, where avoidants demonstrate respect and emotional availability, while partners maintain appropriate boundaries and consequences that prevent return to previous testing patterns and relationship dysfunction. Recovery also requires partner healing from the psychological damage created by chronic disrespectful treatment and testing behaviors, including rebuilding self-worth, trust in their own perceptions, and confidence in their boundary enforcement abilities that may have been eroded through failed test responses. The repair process extends to rebuilding positive relationship patterns, where both partners develop secure attachment behaviors, healthy communication skills, and mutual respect that replaces the testing dynamics with authentic intimacy and emotional connection. Recovery requires ongoing vigilance against testing pattern recurrence during relationship stress periods or intimacy increases, with both partners maintaining awareness of avoidant triggers and implementing appropriate responses that prevent return to dysfunctional testing cycles. The professional intervention and therapeutic support. Severe avoidant testing patterns often require professional therapeutic intervention to address the underlying attachment wounds that drive disrespectful behaviors while helping partners develop appropriate response strategies that promote healing rather than continued dysfunction. Professional intervention begins with individual therapy for avoidants to address their attachment trauma, develop emotional regulation skills, and learn healthy relationship behaviors that replace testing strategies with authentic communication and emotional expression. Therapeutic support includes couples therapy, where both partners learn about attachment patterns, develop secure communication skills, and create relationship agreements that prevent testing behaviors while meeting both partners' attachment and autonomy needs. Professional intervention also involves partner support through individual therapy that addresses the psychological damage from chronic disrespectful treatment while developing boundary enforcement skills and secure attachment behaviors that promote healthy relationship dynamics. Therapeutic support extends to relationship skills development, where both partners learn conflict resolution, emotional regulation, and intimacy development techniques that replace dysfunctional testing patterns with healthy relationship progression and emotional connection. Professional intervention requires sustained commitment from both partners to address deeply ingrained attachment patterns that may have developed over decades, requiring patience and persistence to achieve lasting behavior change and relationship healing. Understanding avoidant disrespect as testing behavior rather than genuine contempt provides strategic frameworks for responses that demonstrate the secure attachment patterns and emotional stability they seek. Success in navigating these tests requires maintaining self-respect and appropriate boundaries while avoiding the emotional pursuit or dysregulation that confirms their fears about intimate relationships and emotional vulnerability. The testing process, while painful and challenging, ultimately serves as an opportunity to demonstrate the emotional maturity and relationship worthiness that can transform avoidant defensive patterns into secure attachment bonds when navigated with wisdom and consistency.